about some more React concepts. Firstly, to set the code breakdown for today's session, you need to run this, then run npm install. With this, all the dependencies will get installed. Finally, run npm start. Now, let's have a look at the concepts that we are going to cover. Starting with reconciliation, then we'll discuss about React batch updating. We'll see some details regarding the set state syntax. We are also going to see about children prop. And finally, we'll understand about the control input and the uncontrolled input. So let's start with reconciliation. Previously, we understood that when we provide the HTML, CSS and JavaScript code to the browser will generate a DOM tree, and based on the DOM tree, the browser will render the web page, right? So this DOM tree is a representation of the HTML document where each node represents a HTML element, right? So this is what we have seen previously. You can see an example here. So we have the div, which is a node, okay? And within that, we have the paragraph element and button element. There are two nodes. And within the paragraph, we have the zero text. So that is one node. And within the button element, we have the increased text. So that is another node and so on. This is just an example of the DOM tree. So now let's understand how React.js works in this direction. So apart from the HTML DOM that the browser creates based on the code, React will create a virtual DOM. This virtual DOM is a virtual representation of the HTML DOM. So we have the HTML DOM created by the browser and the React creates the virtual DOM. Okay. Now, whenever the component re-renders, React will create a new virtual DOM. Okay. We have this virtual DOM, and whenever a component is re-rendered, a new virtual DOM will get created. So after this, the React will compare the new virtual DOM and the virtual DOM, and the difference will be updated in the HTML DOM. Okay, so here you can see that in the new virtual DOM we have one. Okay, in the paragraph we have the one text, whereas as in the virtual DOM, the previous virtual DOM, the text is 0. So apart from that, all other elements remain the same, right? So you can see in all other nodes there are no changes. Only this is the change. So React will compare the new virtual DOM and the virtual DOM and find the difference, and only the difference will be updated in the HTML DOM. Okay, clear? So this is the advantage of using React, because only the difference is being updated to the HTML DOM. Because of this, the websites that we build using React will be more performant. So generally in case of JavaScript, we will be directly updating the HTML DOM. Whereas here, we are only updating the difference in the HTML DOM. Generally, updating the HTML DOM is a bit of costly operation. Okay, it will take more time. But in case of React.js, we are updating only a part of it, whichever is necessary. Because of that, the updation will be more performant when compared to JavaScript. Okay, so that's the reason why the websites that we build using React.js are more performant. So these virtual DOMs will help us render the UI more performantly, because React is only updating what's necessary. If we try to do this using JavaScript, it would be really hard. Whereas in case of React, it's very simple. The React itself is handling this. That is checking what is the difference and only updating the difference, right? This process is called reconciliation. And because of this, the websites that we build using React are more performant. Okay, clear? Let's take an example and understand the same thing. So here we are going to take the counter example. So here you can see we have this count text, and beside that we have the number, and on clicking on increasing button, so the counter should increase, the number there that is being displayed should increase, and if we click on the decrease button, the number that we are displaying there should decrease, right? So now let's have a look at the code. So here you can see within the counter component, we have the state where we are maintaining the count, and on increase button click, so we are updating the state. There you can see, right, the count and the state is being updated, and we are appropriately displaying the count within that paragraph element. You can check that in the render method. Okay. So now let's understand how this works. Okay. So here let's see how the reconciliation will play a role. So let's have a look at the component. So here you can see that the count is being added here, right? So within the paragraph element, we have the count text. Apart from that, we have the count value also. And when we click on the increase button, we are updating the state. So the render method will be called and the count will be updated, right? So let's understand how the reconciliation works here. So you can visually see that. So this is the output. If you click on the counter example, you can see this. So now let me inspect and show you. Okay. So here, this is the paragraph element where we have the count text and we have the count value, right? Okay, so when we click on the increase button, as we understood, only the change will get updated. So here, what is the change? The count text will remain the same. Only the number that we are displaying here should change, right? So according to what we have understood, so only this number should be updated. Neither this entire paragraph element or the entire component should not be updated. Only the difference, that is the count value, should be updated. Let's see if it's happening in the same way or not. So now I'm clicking on the increase button, and you can see here that only this value is being changing. So observe here again. So I'm clicking on increase button, and you can see that only the number is being updated, whereas all others are remaining as it is. Similarly, in case of decrease too, right? So here what's happening? So basically, when we are clicking on increase button, right? So the count is being updated and the render method is called. Since the component is re-rendering, so a new virtual DOM will be created. The difference will be appropriately computed. So the difference is only the count value. So only that is getting updated in the HTML DOM tree, and that's the reason only that is being changed. So when we do in this manner, the websites that we build would be more performant, right? Okay, whereas if you try to do the same thing in JavaScript, you have to access the entire paragraph element and update count 2, count 1, count 0, and so on, right? So when it comes to applications with a lot of complex things, then this React will be more performant when you compare with JavaScript. So this is nothing but called as reconciliation, okay? So we understood this particular example, and you can see that we have compared the new virtual DOM and virtual DOM. So I mean the React compares the new virtual DOM and the virtual DOM, and the difference is appropriately computed. That is nothing but the one text, right? So then appropriately the difference will be updated in the HTML DOM. Only the difference will be updated in the HTML DOM. All others will remain the same. So because of this is our React websites would be more performant, right? Because React is only updating what's necessary. So here, since only the count value in the paragraph text has to be updated, so only that is getting updated, right? Okay. So we have understood about this reconciliation process where React will only update what's necessary. Okay. Now let's proceed further to the next concept, that is React batch updating. Now let's understand about this. Okay. So we already know that when a set state method is called, so then the state will be updated and the render method will be called. So in case if you have multiple set state calls in a method, then generally the multiple set state calls will be combined and the render method will be called only once. That is, the multiple set state calls are combined into a single update. This is called React batch updating. Okay, let's see an example for this. So here you can see that in the counter example, so in the on increment, we have 3 set state calls. There you can see, right? We are trying to update the state. So you can see that we have 3 set state calls. So how many times is the render method called? What do you think? So when a user clicks on the increase button, the on increment will be called. So then how many times do you think the render method will be called? Let's understand this. So here we have the counter example. So in the on increment method, let's say I'm adding multiple set state calls. So here I've added 3 set state calls. Now, how many times do you think the render method is called? So this and the render method has to be called, right? Our expectation would be the render method has to be called 3 times, right? Let's check if that is true. So I'm going to inspect. So let's go to the console. Okay, now let me click on the increase button. So you can see the count has been increased to 3, right? So we are calling the set state 3 times. We are updating the count 3 times. So the count is 3. That is fine. But how many times is the render method called? Once. Why do you think so? Nothing but React batch updating, right? So here, these multiple set state calls in a function are combined into a single update. That is, for all of these 3 set states, finally, the render method will be called once. Right? This is nothing but React batch updating. The reason for this is, so if we have to call the render method for each and every set state in that method, so visually it's not much of a difference. We can't notice that difference. But on the browser side, so for every set state call, if we have to calculate the new virtual DOM, the difference, and then render, so it's a load on the browser. As such, can we see the difference of each render method? No. So the better way is if we combine them and just call the render method once finally, then what will happen? So as such, visually we'll have the same output and the load on the browser will decrease. So the websites that we are building would be more performant. That's the reason this batch updating is coming into play. Okay, clear? So in batch updating, what happens? When there are multiple set state calls in a method, it will be combined into a single update. Okay, so the render method will be called only once. Okay, and we were able to see that output, right? Okay, so we have seen this example where when we click on the increase button, the render method is only called once. Okay, so you can see the count is being increased 3, but the render method is only called once. Okay, So in React batch updating, instead of calling the render method for each and every set state call in the method, so they are combined into a single update, that is they are badged, and then render method is only called once. Okay, this is the React batch updating. So because of this, the performance of the websites will increase. So we are done understanding this concept. Now let's proceed further and understand some details regarding the set state syntax. So previously we understood about the object syntax and callback syntax, right? So generally we'll make use of the object syntax when we directly want to update the state with a value. And in case if you want to update the state with the value based on the previous state, then we make use of the callback syntax, right? So we are already familiar with this. Now the question is, can we use object syntax instead of callback syntax when we want to update the state based on the previous value? So generally, if it is based on the previous value, we make use of callback syntax. But what will happen if we make use of the object syntax? Let's understand. So here you can see we have the increment method, right? So when the user clicks on the increase button, the on increment method will be called. So within that, so we have to update the count of the particular value, right? So the count value, we want to update that. So here you can see we are doing the set state call. So since the count would be dependent on the previous state, we have to use the callback syntax, right? But let's say we have used the object syntax. Then what will happen? Let's understand about that. So here you can see that instead of the callback syntax, we have replaced it with the object syntax. Now what will happen? So there you can see the output. So if you click on the increase button, the count will be only increased by 1. But we are trying to update it 3 times. So it should be increased by 3. But it's only being increased by 1. What do you think is the reason? It's there. The reason is the set state is asynchronous. That is, when we try to update the count in the first function call, so the state wouldn't be updated immediately. So it will take time for updation. Now, immediately the next set state is being called. So since the state is not yet updated, still the value in this .setState.count would be 0. So we are again trying to update it with 1. Okay, again the same thing will repeat for the next function call. So that's the reason that the count is being updated by 1 instead of 3, because the set state is asynchronous. So that this .state.count is same for every set state statement when we use the object syntax. Let's have a look at this. So here you can see we have made use of the callback syntax. Now let's say instead of the callback syntax, we are using the object syntax. Okay. So I'm just replacing it with that. Okay. So now instead of previous date.count, I want to write it, I want to access the count from this .state.count. Okay. So let me just copy this one, and I have to just replicate this 3 times. Okay. So instead of using the callback syntax, I'm making use of the object syntax, right? So now let's have a look at the output. So now I'm increasing the count, and you can see it's only been increased by 1, but our expectation is it should be increased by 3. So we understood the reason behind it. The reason is the set state method is asynchronous. So in the first function call, that is first set state call, so when we are updating the count, so this .state.count would be 0. So 0 plus 1 would be 1, and we are trying to update the count to 1. Okay. But since it's asynchronous, immediately the state wouldn't be updated. And then we have this set state call. So since the state is not yet updated to 1, so here it will still be 0. So again, we are trying to update the count with 1. Here also, it's the same. So we are trying to update the count with 1. So that's the reason here we have count 1. So instead of increasing the count by 3, we are only increasing the count by 1. The reason behind this is the set state is asynchronous. Okay. So now what will happen if we use the callback syntax? So when we use the callback syntax, what happens is the previous state is passed as an argument. So after the first set state call, so the updated state will be passed as an argument to the second set state call. So based on that, the count is updated. And similarly for the third set state call. So the updated state is passed as an argument for each and every set state call. So that is the reason why we have the count increased by 3 when we click on the increase button. Because here, when we are using the callback syntax, the updated state is passed as an argument for each and every set state call. So appropriately, the state would be updated, only then the next updation would be done. So that's the reason we have the count increased by 3, right? Whereas in case of object syntax, that was not the case, right? So with this, one thing is clear. So when we want to update the state based on the previous state value, we have to make use of callback syntax, okay, not the object syntax. Whenever you want to update the state based on the previous state value, you should always use the callback syntax. Okay, clear? So we understood this, right? Let me show you this output. So instead of doing this, so I'm going to just come back to the callback syntax. Okay, so now if we click on increase button, you can see that it's increasing by 3. Okay, so we are done with this output. And let's understand about the children prop. Children is actually a special prop which is automatically passed to every React component. You need not explicitly pass this children prop. React will automatically pass this to every React component. Now let's understand what would the value be of this children prop. So within the opening and the closing tags of the component, so whatever we mentioned, that is, it could be JSX, it could be text, that is considered as children, and it will be sent as a value to the children prop of that component. Okay, so within the opening and the closing tags of a component, so we could write JSX code, we could write text, anything that we pass there, so that we place there, that will be passed as a value to the children prop, and we can access that within that component. Okay, so let's understand this with the help of an example. So here you can see that we have social button. So this social button is a component, and within the opening and the closing tag, we have written like text, right? So now this like text would be considered as children, and it will be passed as a value to the children prop. Now let's have a look at that. So within the social button component, so here you can see we are doing console log of props, and you can see the output there. So for children, we have like text. And then we want to display that on the button. So you can see that within the button JSX element, we are having this curly braces, and we have written props.children. So what do we have in props.children? Like text. So that like text is being added there, and you can see in the button, we have the like text. Okay, clear? So what's happening here is, so we have written like between the opening and the closing tag of this social button component. So this like is the children. So that is being passed as a value to the children prop, and we are able to make use of it within the component. So there you can see on the button, we want that props.children, whatever we enclose within the component, to be present on the button. So we have made use of it, and you can see the button there. Okay, clear? So let's have a look at this output. So let me show you this particular component. Okay, so within the post, you can see we are making use of the social button. Okay, and then in the social button, so we are accessing the props.children, and we are displaying that on the button. So whatever we would like to mention, we would mention here within the opening and closing tag of the component, and that would be displayed on the button because we are accessing the children and we are displaying that on the button. So now let's say I want to display like text. So I'll just pass that here as like. Okay, so this like text will be passed as the value for the children prop, and we are accessing props.children here, and we are displaying that on the button. That's it. Very simple, right? Let's have a look at the output. So let me go back. So let's go to the post example. So here you can see we have like. Similarly, let's say you want to display some other text. Okay, say hello. Okay, so the hello would be displayed. Whatever you pass between the opening and the closing tags of this component will be present on the button. Okay, clear? So we can make use of the children prop in this way. Okay, so we'll see some more examples regarding this. So here you can see we are adding a share icon and also the share text. So as we understood, we can add JSX, we can add text, whatever we mentioned between that opening and closing tag of the component will be passed as children. Okay, you can see here we have the share icon that is being passed, and also the share text. So now, in case of the social button, what we are doing, we are accessing the children and we are displaying that on the button. So that's the reason in the output you can see we first have the share icon and we have the share text, right? So let's understand this. So here, instead of this, now I want a share text. At the same time, I also want some share icon to be, some icon here to be displayed. Okay, firstly I have to import that icon. I'm just doing that step. So import, alright. Share forward line. So you can see this in the cheat sheets regarding this. This is one of the icons that we have. Whichever icons you want, you can add them. So that's not an issue. Okay. So I have imported this RI share forward line, and I can make use of this. So firstly, I want the share icon to be displayed. So I'm adding this here. Okay. So then there's some. Okay. So here I'm passing this JSX, and I'm also passing this text. So both of them will be considered as children. So they will be passed to the social button component. So even if you print it, you can see the output, and then we are displaying them on the button. So here the share icon and the share text will be present on the button. So you can see that here. Okay. So let me inspect, and I will show you. Okay. So within the social button, we have this and the share text, and they are being displayed here. And also, so let's have a look at the console and see the output. So here you can see in the children, so we have the share text and also the JSX element. So they both have been passed as children, and then they are being displayed here. Okay. So similarly, we can add some more buttons. We can pass some data. So here, just like previously, we have seen the like text, right? So we can have a like button. Similarly, we can just, let's say we just want a box. We don't want anything. So we can show something like this, right? So here you can see, right? So if you can pass a JSX text, you can pass text. If you don't pass anything, also you'll have some output like this. Okay, clear? So basically, whatever you enclose within that opening and closing would be considered as children and will be passed as a value to the children prop of that component. Okay, and we can access them here, and then we can make use of them. Okay, clear? So this is regarding the children prop. Okay. So we are done with understanding about the children prop. Finally, let's understand the difference between the controlled input and uncontrolled input. So in React, the input element value can be handled in two ways: controlled input and uncontrolled input. Let's understand about them, starting with controlled input. If the input element value is handled by the React state, then it is called controlled input. So here you can see in this example, in the state, we are maintaining the user input, and we are providing this user input as a value to the input element. So when the user enters something, what should be displayed in that input element is controlled by the React state. So that's the reason it's called controlled input. Okay, because the React state is controlling about what should be displayed in the input element, right? So whereas if the browser handles it, instead of React, if the browser handles it, then it is called uncontrolled input. You can see the example there. We don't have value equal to. We are not providing any value there. So what should be displayed in the input element is handled by the browser, not the React. So that's the reason it's called uncontrolled input. Okay, so you understood? If the React state controls the input element value, then it is a controlled input. If the React doesn't control, if the browser handles it, then it's called uncontrolled input. Okay, clear? Let's see an example for this. So here in the greetings component, you can see in the state we are maintaining the user input, and whenever the user enters something, the on change will be triggered. So there you can see we are updating the state with the updated value, right? So then in the render method, we are providing that value by accessing it from the state, right? So what should be displayed in the input element is controlled by the React state, right? So whatever we have in the state, based on that, we are providing the value to the input element. So this is an example of controlled input. But in case of uncontrolled input, you can see we are not providing any value. So what should be displayed there is not determined by the React state, but the browser is handling it. So in such scenarios, it's called the uncontrolled input. And the best practice is always having a controlled input. Okay, so rather than leaving it to the browser, so the best thing is you handle it using the React state. So control input is the best practice. So whenever you have an input element, so maintain the input element value in the state and provide that as a value whenever you are rendering that input element. That is very, very important, right? So you shouldn't leave it to the browser, but you have to handle it in the React itself. Okay, clear? So we understood the difference between the control input and uncontrolled input, right? Let's have a look at this example. So let me go to the greetings. Okay, so here you can see in the state I'm maintaining the user input. Okay, so whenever the input value changes, the on change event will be triggered. So here you can see that we are updating the state with the latest input value. Okay, so then the state is updated, so render method will be called. So we are accessing the user input, so the latest value is maintained in the state, so we are accessing that and we are providing that as a value to the input element, right? So what should be displayed in the input element is governed by the React state. So this is a controlled input, right? So let me show you the example. So let me go to the greetings example, and you can see this is the input element, right? So whatever I type here, okay, so what should be displayed in this input element is governed by the React state. So now let's say I'm typing Pranita, okay? So here I'm typing, okay, and what should be displayed in this input element? Should it be displayed as Pranita or should it be empty? Whatever it should be displayed there is governed by the React state, right? So it's a control input, okay. So in case if we don't do that, if we don't provide this value, okay, so then it will be uncontrolled input, okay. So we are not mentioning to the input element that what should be displayed there. So if I'm typing Pranita, so should it be Pranita there or should it not be anything, or what it should be, right, is left to the browser. It's browser's wish. Whether I should show Pranita, whether I should show some random text, whether I should leave it empty will be governed by the browser in case of uncontrolled input. So if I'm typing Pranita, so here I'm able to see this Pranita. The reason behind this is the browser is handling that instead of the React state. So this is an uncontrolled input. So based on how browser is handling, what should be displayed in that input element will change, right? So we shouldn't leave it to the browser, whereas we have to take it into our control. So we have to make it a controlled input. So for that, we have to provide that value. So value equal to user input. You have to provide that. Then it will become a controlled input. Okay. So the best practice is always having it as a control input. So whenever you have an input element, so provide the updated value to the value. Okay, so there's this value attribute, right? So you have to write value equal to, and you have to provide the updated value that has to be displayed in the input element. Okay, clear? So now we are done with understanding about the controlled input and the uncontrolled input, right? So we have understood various concepts in today's session, starting with reconciliation, where we understood that so the React will be maintaining virtual DOMs using which the UI is rendered performantly, and we are able to build performant websites using React.26.